Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I'm one of your co-hosts, Rico Borrego.
I am your other co-host, Tony Borrego.
And this is the podcast known as Relatively Sound, where when one door closes, another one opens. Today, we are talking about doors because this is our album for album episode where Tony has recommended to me the album Morrison Hotel by The Doors. Now, I'll give you the quickest background I have with this band because this is probably the same as with the Tom Waits album. I've heard a couple Door singles, Light My Fire, Riders on the Storm, and that's pretty much it. I knew nothing from this album really beforehand, and I don't really have any connection with them. So, Tony, if you want to give us the reasons why you recommended this album to me, maybe your background with them, be a nice little setup.
Yeah, so The Doors to me are a band that I feel like amongst my peers isn't really recognized. I think their music is quite creative. I think as musicians, they're very talented, and the band as a whole definitely has a unique identity. And most people, at least to my understanding, their favorite records of The Doors would be their first self-titled one and LA Woman. Those two seem to be the fan favorites, and for good reason. They're definitely the most blues rock of all the records. Now for me personally, it's hard to pick a favorite. I really like Morrison Hotel though. I think there's I think it does showcase some creativity and not necessarily just trying to follow a more straightforward blues, kind of format, I'll say. And so, yeah, I think you should give The Doors a chance as well. I know with some older bands where, you've heard a few singles, it's kind of easy just to be like, okay, yeah, they're cool, whatever. But I think they're a band worth a deep dive, at least an album or two to see if you like what they have to offer. And what shocked me is that you said you have never heard Roadhouse Blues before, which I would consider I'm just surprised that you haven't heard it.
Yeah, well, when I looked it up on Spotify, it was in their top 5 most streamed songs. So going into this album, I'm like, okay, if I know any songs, it'll be that one. And it is the first song on the album. And when I heard it, I was like, the guitar riff, I was like, oh, I've probably heard this before, but like with the vocals and the rest of the song, nothing really I don't know, unlocked a part of my brain where I'm like, oh yeah, I've heard the song in a movie, I've heard the song on the radio. I probably have, but yeah, it didn't click in my head. So it was pretty much a whole album of songs I've never heard before, which was nice. Because the Ellie Smith episode, I knew like 3 or 4 of those songs. Incubus, I knew a couple. But yeah, this album going into it, I almost knew nothing.
So with that being said, starting off the album with Roadhouse Blues, what is your initial reaction to the album?
Well, going into this album, I had the preconceived notion that the Doors can rock out, but like I was thinking of songs like Riders on the Storm, where it's kind of more a little bit laid back. It's like kind of got a slower groove, a lot of keyboards, a lot of organs. Even like Light My Fire, that one's rock. It's kind of similar style.
Or like People Are Strange, which I assume you know that one too.
I know that's probably only the other one I know. But yeah, this one I was like, when I first heard Roadhouse Blues, I was like, oh, okay, like this is kind of a straightforward rock blues song, as it is in the title. And I liked it. I was like, I guess what impressed me the most was how tight the band sounded. The production was great, and the production is great on pretty much almost every song on this album. So that was great. I mean, it's the 70s, probably my favorite decade of music. Classic Bob Dylan albums, Springsteen, you got the start of Petty, you got some fantastic Neil Young records. Eagles is in that sweet spot for me, of some of my favorites. And this has a great sound to it. And what surprised me with Roadhouse Blues in particular were Jim Morrison's vocals. They surprised me because I've seen like people parody him before. Weird Al has his
Craigslist.
Yeah, which is like a pastiche of the Doors. It's not a direct parody of one of their songs, but it's supposed to sound like the Doors. And yeah, sometimes Jim Morrison's voice, just from the songs I know, can be a little like not sleepy, but like a little. But now listening to this album, I know that he holds back on songs because there are a lot of songs on here where he has great vocal control because there's songs where he like goes all out. And on this song, Roadhouse Blues, he kind of does kind of go more all out. The piano riff reminds me of like Petty, like maybe Benmont Tench from the Heartbreakers was influenced. Harmonica was a nice touch. And I think the song is simple. The solo, for example, is kind of simple, but it's a fun song. The lyrics I think on this album are on this song aren't as strong as on the rest of the album. There's even a part where he's like, I don't even think he's speaking English. It does have one really great line, which I like, which was "The future's uncertain and the end is always near." I thought that was
I
really
think the
cool
line
line.
before, the one that prefaces it, is even better. I
Which one's
woke up
that?
this morning and I got
Oh
myself a
God.
beer. Which
But that's what I mean with the lyrics on this song. And they're like, yeah, that's a funny line, but I actually there's a lot of great lyrics on this album. Um, Maybe not even specifically, but just like what the songs are about, the imagery. But on this song, it's a good song to start the album off. I am surprised it's one of their most streamed songs. I guess one of their most popular. I guess maybe just because it's a fun rock song. I mean, technically, it wasn't even the single; it was the B side to "You Make Me Real," which that was the one and only single from this album.
I think is kind of a crazy choice.
But yeah, I like the song, and let me start. I guess this is a nice segue into my overall thoughts on this album, which are,
Well, may I say one thing real quick?
oh yeah, go ahead.
It's just a small thing, but that woke up this morning, I got myself a beer lyric. The story goes that was actually inspired by Alice Cooper. I guess they were probably after some party or something in the morning. I guess Alice Cooper walks down and says, "Oh, I just got myself a beer this morning." And then Jim jotted that down for safekeeping to use later. That's what Alice Cooper claims, but that kind of to me enhances the song just a little bit.
Well, I'll say it right now, really quick. I know, and I don't know why I always have to bring the hip back into it, the tragically hip, but from what I believe, Gord was a huge fan of the Doors. I want it because I know nowadays whoever manages his Instagram and Facebook, every now and then they'll post a book or a record from his collection. And I want to say one time it was a Doors album. I don't know which one. And I really hear a lot of similarities between the two, like their styles, like lyrically, even too. Like it seems like Jim Morrison, like sometimes will take notes of things, and Gord did that all the time and use them for lyrics. And we'll get into that with other songs here pretty soon. And just their style of singing too. Like Gord can really be, he had great voice control, and he knew when to kind of hold back, and he knew when to let it out. And I feel like that's kind of similar with Jim here. But my overall thoughts on the album, I kind of considered this album to have two different types of songs. The fun rock songs that sometimes would border on, like, I don't want to say silly, but like definitely like
Lighthearted,
lighthearted, more straightforward. And then there was another side of this album that I felt like was like more mysterious, more abstract, and just more in depth lyrically and musically. And those are the songs that I tend to prefer. For the most part, though, I would say even the rock songs I did enjoy. But the one thing I like about this album is that it's not like side one is the rock songs and side two is the, which funny enough, I guess on the vinyl version, side one is considered Hard Rock Cafe and side two is considered Morrison Hotel.
Oh, interesting. I didn't even know that.
But both sides to me, are, they have both type of songs, the rock, straightforward rock songs, and then the more, abstract songs. And, a good example of that is like, take a song like "You Make Me Real." That to me is a kind of another similar song to Red House Blues, right? That one has a great piano lick. Um, Drums have a great, tom groove going on. Guitar line is catchy, but it's a pretty kind of quick song. Lyrics are kind of straightforward. It has great stops in the song. I like that about it, where the music will kind of stop. But and the vocals fit really nicely. But it's kind of like Roadhouse Blues, where there's not a lot to me to talk about. Like I can praise it like I just did, but there's not really anything bad about it. But it's like a nice background song. But then you take a song like Blue Sunday, which I just find way more fascinating. It's got a really cool atmosphere going on with it.
A
It's
crooner delivery from Jim.
Yeah, for sure. I did take in my notes, like laid back vocals, but it blends really well with the keyboard tones and the kind of the dreamy guitar. The drums are still active, but like in a very subtle way, which I liked. Lyrics are like it's like a love song, but I wouldn't say it's like super cliche, which I enjoyed. And even though it was short, like some of the other songs on the album, um, it it kept me well, vested in the song. So again, that's like, okay, You Make Me Real and Red House Blues are like that type of song, but like Blue Sunday and The Spy and Indian Summer to me are like the other side of the coin.
I think that's a very fair statement. I think you're nailing that there. What I will say though is I think I would say there's three rock songs that also nail the abstract elements. Um,
I would say there's
my
two.
You would say only two. Okay, which two are you talking about?
Waiting for the Sun and Peace Frog.
Mm. I would also throw in Land Ho. I know it's a little goofy, but I think the lyrics have its storytelling. I think it's a very unique, like guitar riff. It actually there's a No Doubt song. I can never remember which one that kind of sounds similar to that main riff even.
Okay, so there is a lull in the album for me, and it is Ship of Fools and Land Ho. Both of those songs don't do a lot for me. For Ship of Fools, it's a little too silly sounding, like it's a little too lighthearted. Um, that's like the only moment where I feel like the organ's a bit much for me because I will say I was expecting a little bit more organ on this album, just knowing like the stereotypical things I know about the Doors, but that's like the one song where I was like, okay, the organ is maybe just a little too loud, a little too much going on. Um, I do think lyrically the song is actually fitting and it's relevant for even today. But then like it has some like psychedelic kind of lyrics that just don't do a lot for me. And I will say the music gets more interesting like in the bridge. And it is interesting. I did some background on this background research for the song. And it seems like the name of the song was inspired by a book that was released in the 1930s by Catherine Ann Porter, which I thought was interesting. But it had hit or miss moments for me. And then Land Ho was even, I think, more miss, like the music was just like too kind of basic for me, which usually I'm not one to.
Basic.
Yeah, it just I don't know. Like the music didn't do a lot for me. The most interesting thing were the lyrics on this one because he's like telling the story. And I think the main thing too, I don't know if I like the vocal hook. Like the verse, the way he sung the verse, like I either really liked it or I really didn't. It's one of those weird moments where it's like, did I like that? Did I like that a lot or did I hate it? um, I think the bass fit nicely into like the mix in the bridge. But like the middle lyrics are like really, really weird. Like he's singing about skinning a girl alive. Like I was just like a little uncomfortable during that point. Like I don't know. Like that one was I don't know. The music there was not enough in the music to interest me. So then when I had to rely on the lyrics, they also were like a little weird for me.
Okay. Well, now that you explained yourself, I can maybe see that. I see where you're coming from. To me, it's definitely one of my favorites of the album. I don't know, I just really like the groove of it. I do like his vocal delivery, that there's kind of a narrative to it. Um, Now one of the other songs that you also mentioned was kind of like a rock song, but it was also abstract, is my personal favorite on the record and easily one of my favorite Doors songs, Peace Frog. So the background to the song is that Jim, being kind of a poet, so to speak, I know it's a little bit debatable to some. He had, bits of lyrics here and there, but did not quite have full songs necessarily. So what would happen was that Robbie would have, music he had written, and they would go through Morrison's journal and see, what would match the music. For Peace Frog, he actually had a lyric written called Abortion Stories, as well as Dawn's Highway and Newborn Awakening. And to me, like the two big things, well, there are three big things. So in the beginning, he's talking more about like the abortion stories, the section. There's the bridge where he talks about experience where his family was driving, and I guess he just saw like dead Native Americans. I've never really read a very detailed, account of what really happened there. And then the last thing too was apparently a reference to like a protest, the whole "blood in the street, the town of Chicago" lyrics. So it's kind of an amalgamation of different things that don't necessarily come together, but for some reason this song just works. It just has that groove that you can't resist. The band's going off. I think it's Jim's best vocals on the album. Um, I love the moment near the end where he says blood in the streets and chop off my finger, something like that. It's just great the way he says it. So please tell me that you love this song.
Well, I think you put it really nicely, and I knew some of that background. Like I knew the song was originally called "Abortion Story," but I knew the background when it came to the real life event of him witnessing the car crash. But I didn't know like them going through his like journal and like picking out the lyrics. I do really like the song. I think on first listen, it didn't hit me as much, but on like my second and third listen, it started hitting me more. And I think because the first half of the song, it starts off like it's going to be one of those just kind of a little goofy rock songs, right? Like the riff, the beginning riff is kind of nice, but it's kind of like I don't know, it wasn't anything special. And then I like the imagery of the blood in the streets. And I had in my notes that I think it was possibly a reference to the um, protests after Martin Luther King Jr. Was shot in like you said, the protest that happened in Chicago. Because he specifically mentioned Chicago, which is why I think that's the direct reference. But
Right.
like that part was cool, but where the song really worked for me was the kind of spoken word interlude where
Really?
yeah, and I'm over the years I've really gotten into spoken word, and eventually if I do give you one of these Gord Downie solo albums, there is sometimes some spoken word. Or if I give you the latest Death Cab record, because they have a whole song where it's mostly spoken word and it's fantastic. But yeah, the interlude where he's like again referencing that, and I want to say too, when I looked it up, like his like father was trying to make him like not look at the scene of the Native Americans like dying from um this car crash in New Mexico. And it's like very vivid, and like the lyrics where he's like Native Americans scattered on Dawn's highway bleeding, ghost crowd the young child's fragile eggshell mind. Like
Love
that,
that line.
especially that last line, I'm like, oh, that's like really cool. Like that's great imagery. And that's like where the song really kind of clicked for me, was that moment, because that's when I was like, oh, okay, this song is kind of the combination of a little bit of like the straightforward kind of rock groove, but then something more interesting.
And then not to mention the transition, this song actually flows into Blue Sunday, which we mentioned earlier.
Yeah, on first
Um
listen, I didn't even notice until I think he started singing on Blue Sunday. I didn't even notice. I was like, oh wow, he like this is a new song. I checked my phone and I was like, oh, like okay, we swapped to a different song now. But Blue Sunday is great too. That's another one that I really liked. I liked it from the get go because Blue Sunday is also the name of a Tom Petty song.
Oh, okay.
And I'm kind of wondering if maybe he got inspiration from from this song. It doesn't sound like it musically, but and I don't know, maybe there's a ton of songs with the same name, but when I just saw the title, I was like, oh, that's one of my like favorite underrated Petty moments. But yeah, I love just the overall vibe of the song. I know we talked about it kind of earlier, so I won't go too much more into it, but it's just, sweet lyrics. My girl waits for me in tender time. And I know there's a couple songs on this album that are specifically about his girlfriend. Um, and I want to say like his like main girlfriend, the relationship he had until, he passed away. And then I guess she passed away shortly after. Um, but yeah, I just really like it's a short song. There's not a ton of lyrics, but I just really like the production of it. I like, especially like you said, the transition from, you know, the previous song. I guess the only thing I didn't like about Peace Frog is the name. I don't love the name, and I also don't. I That's one thing I guess I didn't really look up, like why it was called Peace Frog. Do you know why it's called Peace Frog?
I actually have no clue why. I have a guess though. I wonder if Robbie, when he wrote the music for it, if that was like a working title he had, and then, considering that the lyrics are kind of pulled from several different writing sessions of Jim, maybe they just decided to keep the working title of the song. That's just
Well,
a thought.
yeah, because if originally was called Abortion Stories, I could see um back then them like going, yeah, let's if the producer or someone maybe was like, let's not call it that.
Right. Especially because I think this was after Jim has become a lot very very controversial with his kind of outrageous behavior. So I imagine they didn't want to add to that.
Yeah. Um but no,
So
like that song, both those songs, the transition, fantastic.
so the one other song that is very I would also just say abstract. I think that's a great word, and that's why I really like the Doors. And then this record in particular, is because there's that variety of kind of real creative and then just, straightforward energy. And to me, another great example of meshing those two worlds is Waiting for the Sun, which Soundgarden's actually covered live before, which is kind of cool.
Huh. I'll have to check that out. That's interesting. Yeah, Waiting for the Sun might be my favorite. This album, there's three songs that I really, really like that I haven't decided on which one I like more. This one reason I would say it's my favorite or in contender for being my favorite is because I think it is that nice balance of like it starts off with like this really cool keyboard sound, right? And tone, which is cool. And it's got a great little groovy bass line. But then there's those breaks in the verse, like before the chorus, where it's like dun 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 dun, and like the guitars are nice and crunchy. And it's a nice way to break up that kind of progression that you have going on in the verse. And then when you get to the verse, it's a nice little contrast. The verse is like the chorus. I mean, the chorus is a little bit like lighter in sound and just tone, which I think is really cool. Um, the bridge, I mean, the word I would use to describe the bridge is just epic, like just kind of the way it builds. And I like the imagery is one of those songs where it's like he's like, sings about the Garden of Eden. It seems like he's singing about imagery and of course our freedom. He's singing about freedom with like the imagery of the sun and spring and just like life overall, like the weirdness of life, which I liked. And especially after that line in particular, he has this really cool scream, which I think is great. I think the song is maybe even the best production on the whole album. And I already like the production on the whole album, but this song I feel like is just a step above it.
Very
And
dynamic.
and it reminds me a little bit like just like especially the beginning vibe of like Riders on the Storm. But I feel like I like this better because it's a little shorter, it's a little bit more to the point, and it's just the rock moments. I just love like those little rock out instrumental breaks.
Yeah, those little breaks are pretty mean, not gonna lie. And I think a real noteworthy lyric of the song that I think people like talk about a lot is "This is the strangest life I've ever known," which I mean is can be kind of seen as a little goofy, but I like that line though. Um, yeah, I know. I think that was a great description of the song. It was definitely one that stuck with me early on listening to the record. Maybe even before Peace Frog, to be honest. Um, yeah, and I love that slide guitar in the chorus.
Yeah, it
Um,
is really nice in the chorus. So is Peace Fog your favorite on the album?
yeah, I would say Peace Frog's my favorite. It's just
Well, so what's your
every time
second?
I hear it, it just gets me in the mood.
What would be your second favorite?
Probably for me, there's just a chunk that I love so much, and it's um Peace Frog, Waiting for the Sun, Blue Sunday, Land Ho. And then the other one that we haven't really talked about that I actually do really like is I really love Indian Summer. To me, I could see how someone may think of it as a little too maybe almost maybe hippie sounding kind of. But I think it's a really pretty song, and I believe it was actually recorded a couple years before the album, if I'm not mistaken. And I love the guitar solo in it. Robbie Krieger's definitely an underrated guitarist. Before the Doors started, he was only playing guitar for like I think maybe 3 years. And some of his work was like classical, Spanish guitar. But I think he just kills it on there. Is this one, which group do you fall in that you think it's boring or forgettable, or do you think it's absolutely beautiful?
Well, remember, I didn't say I don't really think there's any song on this album that's what I'd say is boring because even like Land Ho and Ship of Fools, two songs that like I just don't like those songs being back to back on the album because if there would have been a maybe more interesting song in the middle, I would have liked those songs better.
That Ship of Fools is the end of side one, if that makes any difference to
Uh, no, because it's like you're ending side A on like a slightly sour note, and then you're beginning side B with a slightly sour note. Um, but no, Indian Summer. I said there were three songs that are competing for number one, and this is the other one of the other ones. Um, it's hard for me to say it's my favorite because it is really short.
the
A lot of the
shortest on
songs
the
on this album
album.
are short. No, I don't think it's the shortest. Is it?
Oh, yeah, 2:33. Oh no, Blue Sunday
Blue
shorter. I'm
Sunday.
sorry.
And I kind of think of the song as like a Blue Sunday part two in the sense.
Right,
Like they have
same.
similar vibes, but I think I like this one better because oh man, the vocal melody when he comes in with that very first line, I love you the best, is butter. It is fantastic. It's what sold me on the song from the very beginning. Like I just really love that vocal melody. And he kind of keeps it with most of the song. A song where it doesn't really have like a verse or chorus, I feel like. I mean, I feel like the music's kind of similar throughout, but it's short, so that's okay. Lyrics are super simple. I mean, it's literally as simple as I love you the best, better than all the rest that I
That I
met
meet
in
in
the,
the summer.
yeah, that I meet in the summer, Indian summer. And I think on Wikipedia, it said when they recorded this album, um, they recorded it. Well, I think, like you said, I think the song was written. It looks like the song was written in 1966. So
Oh, so
definitely,
that's early on.
yeah. Um,
To their
and
first
I think I
record.
read like the reason it's called Indian Summer is because like when he met his girlfriend, it was during an Indian summer.
Oh, it's
And
kind of
and
sweet.
and I just feel like the music fits that vibe of an Indian summer. And I remember us growing up in Washington. I remember a couple of different Indian summers where it was just like it got really hot where around the time September where you think it's going to start cooling down and it's just kind of so weird like I think it's just a memorable thing especially in Washington where you really expect September to start cooling down. Here in California in Indian summer like I don't even know if we'd even notice. It's like I feel like an Indian summer is what we experience every year, but
But in Washington, summer is valuable.
yeah. And I just really like the music on the song. I think the drums, again, subtle but really nice with like the hi hats and the ride that's going on. Guitar is dreamy, just like in Blue Sunday. Bass is really good, especially near the end of the song. And yeah, I just really love the vocal melody. Like I think his vocals really sell it for me. And I was not expecting to go into this Doors album with me saying the reason I like some of these songs is because of his vocals.
Yeah, I think he's someone that definitely, I mean, I understand some of his deliveries might be a little bit dated, and I understand that, there's just a lot of kind of jokes, towards him with that type of stuff. But I really do think he's a great singer, and I would say he's one of the pioneers of the time. And something that I did want to talk about with you about the album is just the musicians themselves. Something that noticed you pointing up is that you like a lot of the drum parts. I personally think John Densmore is an underrated drummer because I feel like he's an example of someone that writes drum parts, as opposed to just kind of playing along and just kind of being the simple foundation. I feel like he definitely takes the liberty to on the ballads as well to to come up with a good drum part that works with the song and and elevates it. Um, is that something you would kind of agree with, or am I just kind of glorifying these people?
No, I agree. And I think it goes beyond just the drums, but like the bass and the guitar work. I mean, like I said, going into this album, I know like the Doors is like a I know Jim Morrison kind of steals the spotlight like a lot of lead singers do, but I also know like they're just like a band, like it's not like Tom Waits where like he has maybe different backing members on each album. It's like, mostly, I mean, I don't know the history as much. I don't know if there was a lot of changes in the lineup of the band, but they're all, what surprised me, I guess, is just like how tight they are, like, and how innovative they are with their different parts, how they can make a song that could be really simple, sound fresh and not stale. And I think all of the members, just like Jim Morrison, know when to pull back on more subtle moments and when to kind of let loose and be impressive. So what I liked a little, I actually I feel like that if anything, and I'm not usually the one to say this, I wish there was a little bit more guitar solos, like a little bit just more. The guitar parts are all great, and like, but even like the solo on like, I think it's Roadhouse Blues. It's like I wanted him to let loose just a little bit more actually. Um, but that's a small criticism because I rather that than someone that's just showing off, someone that's just like playing too many guitar parts, kind of like too many cooks in the kitchen. Like I like that there was a lot of subtlety on this album.
I remember watching an interview of Eric Kretz, the drummer of STP, and something that he said was that he tries to play a lot more simple on the records. That way he doesn't regret something he plays. But then, in live performances, he definitely steps it up more and, is a little more active, which I think is something that I think, the Doors probably kept in mind. Something I'm not sure if you're talking about the lineup. So it's always just been, a four piece. But in the studio, they had a bass player. Just because as far as like the production, it just sounds a lot better and fuller. And also on LA Woman, they actually had a rhythm guitarist as well. But live, Ray Manzarek will do all the keyboard parts or all the bass parts, on the keyboard with his left hand, and then still do all the other, piano parts as well, which I think is really cool. And I think it just kind of goes to show their musicianship. Something else that I read that's actually kind of hilarious is that there were several times, several maybe under exaggeration, but where Jim would just be like too drunk or passed out when they're at a show trying to perform. So Ray and Robbie would they would actually sing the songs themselves. So I don't know, it's just those things like that. And just as a musician, I just really respect them and appreciate them for that. And I would say they're an example of a band like U2, where when you hear them, it's them. They have unique elements, and the way they play together is, very tight and special.
Well, I definitely think they should have kept the bassist that is on this album and like, had him join them on stage. Not because like they needed him, but the bass on this album I think was great. It's not every song was it like, you know, like in your face, but like Land Ho, The Spy, Indian Summer, there's like fantastic. Waiting for the Sun, there's fantastic bass parts. Um,
Yeah, for sure. Agreed.
and like I do like band, like that's why I like to listen to band like the Chili Peppers, where like the bass is like almost as important as the guitar. Because there's some bands where it's like, unfortunately, I love like I really like the Foo Fighters, but there's just not, and there are some great standout bass moments, but even the bass moments that are standing out, they're just so mixed, not great. They're so like mixed in the background. And I feel like on this album, the moments where the bass is doing something really interesting, it is mixed, nice up front where it can be heard.
Yeah.
So I did appreciate that. Now like I said, there was one more song that I had in contender for number one, besides Waiting for the
Waiting for the
Sun
sun.
and Indian Summer. And there's three songs we haven't really talked about. What do you
Well,
think is the
okay.
third one?
I was actually going to bring up two of the songs that we have not talked about so far. I actually had some kind of some gripes with them that I would like to talk to you later. But if I had to guess out of the three left, I would say, and honestly, any of these being in your top definitely shocks me. But I would say Queen of the Highway.
No. Now, Queen of the
What?
Highway, I do think it's slightly better than it's more interesting. For sure, it's more interesting, and I just like it better than Land Ho or Ship of Fools. Don't know if I like it as much as You Make Me Real or Roadhouse Blues as like the other rockers, but it's a little bit more in the middle of the pack for me. No, it is The Spy. I love The Spy. In fact, on first listen, The Spy
Really?
was my favorite. Now it's in contention with Waiting for the Sun and Indian Summer. But yeah, it is. I thought on first listen, I was like, when on first listen, it was weird because it was the song when I first heard The Spy, I was like, oh, this was kind of more the door sound I was expecting, like more of that kind of Riders on the Storm. The Spy, first of all, the bass work is probably the best on the whole album. It's just got this like kind of slower, great groove to it. The piano flourishes are a nice touch, especially the low notes that are being hit, I think really add nice texture to the song. Um, the little change they do in the chorus is kind of like unexpected, but like in the best way possible. The song just has like a really sleek sound to it. And again, what won me over right away was Jim Morrison coming in with that melody, just him what is like the first lyric is just him going, I'm a spy, but like the way he sings it, it just fits the song so well. And lyrically, it's not even a super complex song. Like I did some research, and it looks like again he took the title and the lyrics from a book that is called "A Spy in the House of Love," because that's one of the other lyrics in the song. You can sing, "I'm a spy in the House of Love," but they just called it "The Spy," maybe just to make it easier to remember. Again, another
Right.
book, where he takes the lyrics idea, and it's a song where it's like, again, lyrically, like maybe he's singing about his girlfriend, but like, there's nothing super vivid in the song. But I don't know. I just really like the vibe of the song. Um, Again, the vocals and like the way he comes in with that melody reminds me of something that Gord would do. So again, maybe Jim Morrison was really a big inspiration for him. Love the way the song kind of starts to fade out at the end, and then it does this like kind of quick different ending. Like, yeah, just like a fantastic song. Like, and it's one of the long. Is it the longest song on the album? I think it's the longest.
Yes.
It's the longest, and
Well, no. Maggie McGill is like 9 seconds
okay,
longer.
but it's like the second longest, and it's like to me like yeah, this is worthy of being a 4 minute song. Like so. The Spy is one of my favorites, and Maggie McGill is by far my least favorite. Um,
I could definitely see that.
Now I don't know if you had any thoughts on the Spy. Well, we can get to Maggie McGill in a second, but yeah, the Spy is definitely one of my favorites.
Well, something I was gonna note about my kind of gripe with the spy is I have a lot less gripes with the spy. I think the only two things I have with it is that I really love Lan Ho, but that's also a 4 minute song. But so it's kind of like two 4 minute songs in a row, which with a song full of 2.5 to 3 minute songs is kind of a long stretch. But to be fair, the album opens with Roadhouse Blues and Waiting for the Sun, which are also two 4 minute songs. I just prefer Waiting for the Sun more than The Spy. Um, and the other thing is that part of me, even though the songs are different, and even though I do like The Spy a lot more than Maggie McGill, I always kind of think of those two songs together because at the heart of it, they're two like bluesy rock, straightforward songs where Indian Summer's the kind of really creative floaty ballad. Land Ho is the whole ship sort of music, and then Queen of the Highway, which we could maybe discuss as well later, is a little more experimental rock, but still short. So I think kind of the association of Maggie McGill and kind of the length of the spy and the track listing does sort of, maybe bring it down a point or two for me. But I think you made a lot of great points, and you know, I guess if I knew, I didn't think you would love Jim so much on this record. And, now knowing that, you actually like some of his delivery a lot, that really makes a lot more sense why you would like The Spy. It's just such a laid back song. Um, but Maggie McGill lived on a hill, the poetic words right there. So,
Well, well, really quick before we get to Maggie McGill, we mentioned you mentioned really quick Queen on the Highway, and I did like the song. I liked the electric keyboard sound, and I like how right away at the beginning you think it's going somewhere, and then the tempo changes and there's more energy to it. There's little great guitar jabs that kind of go in the song, and they're just kind of going like in and out. Um, Kind of cool imagery about him talking about his girlfriend and like some road analogies and stuff.
talks about
Um,
Indian Swirl, which is kind of, the next song's Indian Summer. I'm not
and
sure. Yeah.
yeah, and there's a cool little like rhythm change up in the middle, but it's like really quick. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about. That's kind of cool.
Yeah.
I don't think
Yeah.
it's a time signature change. It's just like a tempo change, but it's pretty drastic. But then it kind of goes away, which, like you said, it was a little bit more experimental musically. Great dynamics in the song for sure. Definitely great dynamics, but it's just, I guess, lyrically, it's more simple, and it definitely does not move me as much as Waiting for the Sun or Indian Summer or The Spy. But I think I definitely like it more than Land Ho or um, Ship of Fools for sure.
What about
But
like You Make Me Real? Because I think You Make Me Real also is kind of
I
simple
think,
lyrically, although I think Queen of the Highway definitely has a lot more misses.
well, I think You Make Me Real, the performance on the song is better. But I also think Queen of the Highway musically is maybe more interesting. So it's hard. It's hard for me to I'd have to listen to the album a couple more times for me to kind of decide which one is better. Because right now I can picture You Make Me Real in my head way more than I can Queen of the Highway. Maybe that's just because Queen of the Highway sandwiched between two of my favorite songs on the album. But how do you go from one of the best songs, Indian Summer, such a cool, laid back, an actual like summer kind of vibe, but like a summer at night vibe, like when the sun's setting? How do you go from that to just like a really dumb song like Maggie McGill? Like, why is this the last song? Like, why do some bands like to end? It's like if they're not ending with a ballad, which I think is kind of overplayed at this point.
It's a cop out.
Why, if you're not going to end with a ballad, why don't you just go ahead and end with like a real rock song, like a real dramatic, like closer, or like a really? They're like, okay, we're gonna end with like a fun, upbeat rock song, but they always end it with like a I don't want to say stupid, but kind of a stupid song, like
It's
it's like
dumb.
about prostitution, which just makes me feel weird. It's like just silly and goofy. I think it's like a throwaway song. Like the only saving grace to me on the song is the vocals. The vocals are still really good, but because they're powerful, but I just do not like. And it's like again, like you said, it's the longest song on the album, and it does not warrant. There's some of these songs are great and they're really short, like Peace Frog is not even quite 3 minutes. That could have been a little bit longer. Blue Sunday could have been a little longer for sure. Indian
And
Summer
even
could have
those
been
together
longer.
is only, together they're actually, let me see,
Well, there's still
5 minutes. It's only five
yeah,
minutes for those two songs together, and that doesn't even feel that long when you actually hear it, all flow together.
and yet Maggie McGill gets the longest runtime. Yeah, I don't understand. Like, yeah, definitely not. And I think when I first heard it, I was still just a little happy from Indian Summer that I didn't really notice how bad Maggie McGill was. But then the other day when I was listening to it and I was like, I can't really remember how Maggie McGill goes. How does it go? And I listened to it closer and I was like, oh, this is not a song I like.
Yeah,
Like, uh,
you kind of want to excuse it because you're like, oh, okay, Indian Summer, ballady. Let's pick it up and just do, straight to blues or rock, but it just lacks the substance of Roadhouse Blues, which I mean, I could see some people saying that maybe Roadhouse Blues isn't necessarily a lot of substance in there, but um it's just, it's a lot more flawed. Um
but
now
I'm glad there's only two songs. I'm glad there's only one song like Maggie McGill, and I'm glad that the album isn't full of songs like Roadhouse Blues. Because even though I do enjoy that song, if the majority of the songs were like that song, I would have enjoyed this album definitely less.
which is why I didn't give you LA Woman, because there's a few pretty heavy songs that are definitely more in that blues rock, area there.
Which I'm for sure iffy when it comes to that blues rock song because I listen to a lot of bands that are inspired by blues rock, and I just like the hip, especially the first hip album is really blues rock, and it's by far my least favorite from them because I feel like they're just trying to take influences and wear them on their sleeve too much. Where later on they become a little bit more like that kind of art rock where they transform and yeah they maybe do more ballads, but they also just do more interesting choices. And that's why at least with the Doors, like yeah, there's a couple songs where it's in that blues realm, but the songs where like they are the more abstract, I definitely just enjoy more.
Yeah, and I think if, the more you listen to The Doors, I think the more, which already sounds like you already have started to, but like the more you appreciate the musicianship and, Jim's vocals, whether they're real rough or whether they're more contained. So I think that's why some of the more blues songs that I may just that I may overlook for other bands, I think those I might enjoy more, you know, when the Doors do it, I guess, really, not to play the game of exceptions. Um, so I got one more main question that I'm kind of curious about because you're really good with track listings and whatnot. So first off, just kind of the idea of, if you were to shuffle around the track listing, but in particular, I think side two is where the album lacks. And there's still great songs on side two. The Spy, Indian Summer, I Love Land Ho. But it definitely is kind of, the dulling part of the album for me. Is there anything you would do to fix the track listing or just that side? Or do you
Well,
think it's perfect?
I don't think it's perfect, and I didn't really it's not an album. There's for sure other albums out there where I think the track listing is an issue. This isn't necessarily one of those, but you pose an interesting question, and I'm looking at the track listing now, and here's what I would do. First of all, I know the album's only 11 songs, but if possible, I would take off Maggie McGill for sure, right? So it's just scratched. I would keep
Great start.
Roadhouse Blues and Waiting for the Sun together. I would also keep You Make Me Real there. So it'd be the three songs would stay the same. Then what I would do is instead of Peace Frog as fourth and Blue Sunday's fifth, I would put like Land Ho in the fourth spot. And then after Land Ho, I would put Indian Summer. And then I think that would end side one for me. And I would begin side two with The Spy. And then have Ship of Fools after it, and then Queen of the Highway, and then I would actually end with Peace Frog and Blue Sunday.
That would be interesting.
I would
I
prefer to end with Indian Summer as the very last song and have Peace Frog in front of it, but you just can't split up Peace Frog and Blue Sunday because of that, like, seamless transition.
And you
But
need Blue Sunday separate from Indian Summer because those are the two most
they
ballad-like
sound like,
songs.
yeah, they definitely sound somewhat similar. So yeah, that's what I would do. I would, that way you cut the fat with Maggie McGill, and you split up the Spy and Land Ho, which was one issue for you, two 4-minute songs.
Well,
Um,
also, I think kind of just looking at this track listing, I think it's kind of interesting that I feel like you can kind of group the songs in pairs. So to me,
that's kind of what I try
um,
to do. Yeah.
Queen of the Highway and You Make Me Real are kind of similar, that they're good songs, kind of, fast paced. The ballads are separate. Um, Ship of Fools and Land Ho also, I think, are kind of the pairs. I guess you would say Roadhouse Blues and Maggie McGill together, and Waiting for the Sun and Peace Frog together. Like, it's kind of interesting how, how you could really just separate them like that.
And they should be, because I don't think, yeah, if you had Blue Sunday and then Indian Summer to follow it, it's too much of that kind of slow sound. If you had Roadhouse Blues and then You Make Me Real after it, it's a little too much of the same. Which is kind of why that the lull of the album for me for sure is Ship of Fools into Land Ho, because they're two similar sounding songs to me, both which I don't find extremely fascinating.
Yeah, Ship of Fools is the little brother for me.
So yeah, I do think kind of splitting them up is for the best. But I do think side two is definitely weaker, because side one, I mean, just Peace Frog, Blue Sunday, and Waiting for the Sun is so great. Where side two, to me, it's like The Spy and Indian Summer are the two best ones, and then like Queen of the Highways, decent, Landho a little less decent, and then Maggie McGill the worst. So um yeah, I do think track listing could have been a little different, but I still I'm impressed by the album. I'm really, I guess, impressed by the showmanship, like just the musicians themselves. You know,
Right.
every person really played to their strengths, and really impressed by Jim Morrison. I just was, not expecting just how great his vocals are, which is definitely something that I definitely my own mistake for not realizing how great he is. But that's what happens when you only know a band for like two or three songs, and you don't. That's why I'm always trying to listen to a whole album before I decide if they're for me or not. Because now I would go and listen to some of their other albums, just like you know I'm definitely, when I get the chance, I'm gonna listen to more Incubus and listen to more Tom Waits. Because so far you've not given me an album or band that I've like totally disliked. So, what if you had to give me the next album? What would it be for the Doors?
So from if I had to suggest one for you, I would probably suggest their first record, their self-titled. And the reason why is because I think that one has a good variety of songs. And um there's a few ballads that I think are nice. There is a very long song that I'm not quite sure how you'd feel about. The End, which is definitely a fan favorite, pretty infamous song. Um and I think I the one downside about it for me is the production's not as good there. Jim's not at his best there. There is some really great moments on there though, don't get me wrong, but there's some parts that I think could be a little more refined. Um and then yeah, like Strange Days is a great record, but that one never quite hit me. Waiting for the Sun I like, but that definitely has some of those more like Ship of Fools, You Make Me Real type of songs that are good, but a little more lightweight. Soft Prairie, we're not even going to talk about that. An LA Woman is a bit more of that heavy blues rock, which I think it'd be best if you kind of fell in love with the band a little more before hearing that.
That's a
So
fair point.
yeah, I would just say probably the first record you would enjoy. There's really some golden moments there that really got me into the band. Now, do you have any more closing thoughts about the album? I think I know it's a short record. I think we were pretty thorough with it,
No,
but
I think, like I said, I was impressed, and there's definitely, at least, I would say, half the record I'm gonna go back to for sure. Three songs I loved, probably a handful of other songs that I enjoyed a lot. And it makes me excited to go and listen to other albums, because I do think they could be a band where I maybe don't listen to them all the time, but I could see getting like this record on vinyl and put it in my collection. Just to let the viewers know, I'm actually in a couple days I should be getting the Incubus album, Like Grenades, in the mail because I liked it so much,
Ooh.
and I saw a good sale online, and I was like, I can't not buy it, right? So, and bought it. I can see myself getting this at the record store, Morrison Hotel, because it's an album I'd put on if I'm just kind of in that type of mood, where I'm like, I want a couple rock songs and then I want a couple chill songs. So, but yeah, I really enjoyed it. Thank you for the recommendation. Next week, we will be getting into my album recommendation for you, and that's Radiohead's In Rainbows. You excited?
I am excited. I think there's gonna be a lot to talk about. I think that might be a little bit of a longer episode.
Yeah, we'll see. I have a lot to say, but my background with the band and whatnot, but we'll keep it for that episode. But I'd like to thank everyone for listening. If this is an album that you enjoyed or listened to for the first time with me, go ahead and drop the comments. Give us your thoughts. And yeah, until then, we'll see you next week on the next episode. Till then, take care and bye.